this attack on Ukraine was provoked. Okay. Now, I like to look at historical sources, and I think I'll start off with this before I show some slides. We have, courtesy of WikiLeaks, a cable from Embassy Moscow. Now, it's authentic. Everything WikiLeaks puts up is authentic, and I happen to know this is authentic because if I've seen one cable from Embassy Moscow, I've probably seen thousands during my career as chief of Soviet foreign policy branch at the CIA. This is what it says. Bill Burns, that is the U.S. ambassador to Russia, was called into the foreign ministry by Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister, just newly appointed in those days. The year is 2008. The date is February 1. And this is William Burns' account. He says in his title, "Niet" means "niet." Russia's NATO enlargement red lines. That's how he reported it back to the United States. With respect to NATO enlargement, particularly to Ukraine, it remains an emotional and a neuralgic issue, and strategic policy considerations are important. Here's the kicker. Here's what Lavrov said to our ambassador. With respect to Ukraine, we are fearful that this issue will split the country, the issue being whether NATO is able to accumulate Ukraine. It will split the country into, this is a quote, leading to violence or even some claim civil war, which would force Russia to decide whether we have to intervene, period, end quote. Now, that was October 1st, 2008. 2 months later, NATO decided at a summit, Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. Declarative voice, okay? Will become members of NATO, okay? So now, fast forward just 15 years, and you have William Burns in a new position. He's now head of the CIA. And whereas Sergei Lavrov told Bill Burns, on the 1st of February 2008, that this would provoke a civil war and possibly would force Russia to decide whether to intervene or not, end quote. Well, hello. Now Bill Burns says the Russian invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked. Unprovoked. So now Bill Burns is almost as old as I am, but can you reason? Can you believe that he forgot what he was told? I don't think so. He's become a cog in the wheel and part of the multimedia campaign about which we'll talk a little bit later. Now, there is one aspect that Jeff and I disagree on, and it's a minor aspect considering the unprovoked nature of this war and other calculations that Jeffrey has expounded on so well. And that is, well, did Putin have any other options? I mean, hello, he does this special military operation. It's limited in nature. I think that he wanted to get the Ukrainians to negotiate seriously. He got that done in 6 weeks, but all of a sudden, boom, it fell down, right? So did he have any other options at that time? And so what I'm going to do, because we sort of promised you a little dialogue on this, I'm going to show a couple of slides here that will sort of represent my view as to the fact that Putin had run out of options, that he had no other choice, that there were no other choices other than the one he made, given the fact that he's president of a country who is seeing an existential threat and needs, in the first instance, to fulfill his duty of defending his country. And so that's what he was provoked into doing. Okay, this is what was going on in Donetsk and Lugansk in February 2022. Most of the Ukrainian army is massed across from Donbass. That, incidentally, is one reason why it was such easy going for part of the Russian army to go through Kharkiv and surround Kiev. Kiev really wasn't defended. They didn't expect that kind of attack. So let's look at February 16. Now, if you look at the graph, I hope you could see it well. The 16th is the third bar graph from the left, and it shows that there was a geometric increase in explosions, they call it. Now, these data are from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, okay? A nonpartisan data, okay? So you could see that on the 16th of February, there was a great increase. Oh, the 17th, even more. Whoa, the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd. So what are we saying here? We're saying that the Ukrainian army was shelling mostly civilians, because that's what most was in Donbass, in a geometric increase, a big uptick, as people like to say, starting on February 16th. So the invasion was February 24th, right? So this the 16th, and all the while, the bulk of the Ukrainian army is massed near Donbass. I'll start talking to it.
Yeah, I might interrupt then.
On the 21st of February, here he goes. Putin lists his grievances. It was a very angry speech, almost an hour. And what he says, in short, is Kiev is, quote, trying to orchestrate a blitzkrieg in Donbass. You all know what a blitzkrieg is. He points out that there are almost 4 million Russian speakers, people of Russian stock, in the Donbass, in Donetsk and Lugansk. He notes that the the Security Council approved these Minsk agreements. They were not honored by the West. We could talk later about why that happened, but both Angela Merkel from Germany, well, I'll go to the next slide for that. So what Putin says, hey, it's a long overdue decision, but I've made it. And I'm going to recognize the independence of these two republics, and we're going to sign defense treaties with them. So 2 days later, 23rd of February, Donetsk and Lugansk sign these treaties. They invoke the treaties and say, look, we need help. On the 24th, the next day, Putin invokes Article 51 of the UN Charter, and he sends troops in. We could talk about Article 51 a little bit later if you wish, but that's what he does to say, this is what we're doing. Bear in mind, Putin is trained not only as an intelligence analyst or operative, but also as a lawyer, okay? Now, why do I fast forward to June 28, 2023? Well, because by then, Hollande of France, Merkel of Germany, and Poroshenko of Ukraine have all admitted Minsk, Minsk, that was just a delaying tactic. We engaged the Russians so that we could build up Ukrainian forces with good training and NATO-style weapons, and that's what we used the Minsk process for. So Lavrov is just saying, yeah, they've confessed now that all they did was, in Lavrov's words, pour weapons into Ukraine. And he says something that I think Jeff will agree with. If the Minsk agreements were implemented, there would have been no need for the special military operation. The role of the United States in the Minsk agreements, well, you need to look on France and Germany as vassals of the United States in this imbroglio, and they still are. Okay, this captures Angela Merkel on the left, Putin in the middle there, and Hollande from France on the right. I'm going to leave it to you, audience, to decide what caption belongs to reflect what Putin may have been thinking at that time. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to explore a new subject, but it has very much to do with Putin's decision. We've already talked about the buildup against Lugansk and Donetsk. We've talked about how Putin and Lavrov felt they were diddled, to use an expression from the Bronx. And we've talked about how they saw their choices. Now, missiles near Russia, missiles near US. Well, I'm talking about the missiles in Cuba. They were there in Cuba. John Kennedy felt an existential threat. He was a nuclear-powered country, and he told Khrushchev, "You take those missiles out, or else." I'm having a little thing here in my slide. If you could get rid of that, that'd be great. So, what's the story here? Putin on the 21st of December now, so weeks before January, he's saying, look, he's addressing his very top generals and admirals. They have 4 stars to sit in on this, okay? Defense Minister Shoigu is there. He says, look, these MK-41 launchers that are already in place, already operational in Romania, and are about to be operational in Poland, we don't know what's in those capsules because they're hidden. But if ballistic missiles, they could reach us in 7 to 10 minutes, or even 5 minutes if they're hypersonic missiles. Well, then Putin says this, and please pay attention to this. If the U.S. does not have hypersonic missiles yet, but we know when they'll have them. They will supply them to Ukraine. Whoa, okay. This is a map, but we're not going to dwell on it, but you can see the emplacements that already exist, and they're both operational now. In Poland on the top, in Romania on the bottom, and you can see a putative emplacement near Kiev in Ukraine. Now, so you'll see from Poland, it'll be a normal run-of-the-mill generic ballistic missile would take 9 minutes to get from their place in Poland to Moscow. From Romania, it would take about 10 minutes. From somewhere in Ukraine, look at Ukraine, it's a lot closer than Poland or Romania, it would be 7 minutes. And what Putin also said, of course, was supersonic missiles or hypersonic missiles, 5 minutes. So put yourself in Putin's place. Do you want have only 5 minutes to decide whether you're under a nuclear attack and whether you should press the button to destroy the world? If I were him, I would not like this. Okay, now just for purposes of comparison, I asked a specialist to draw this map, which has to do with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And you can see that the SS-4s, the medium-range ballistic missiles, would take 12 minutes to reach Washington. It would take a little longer to reach Omaha, where our strategic air command was, but that was the same kind of danger. Suffice it to say that Kennedy saw that as an existential threat, and he moved. Actually, he did a lot of illegal things, like a blockade, amassing an invasion force ready to pounce on Cuba, like threatening nuclear war. Okay, he was serious. Khrushchev, the Soviet leader at the time, said, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. This is not an existential threat for us. So let's get those missiles out of there. So that's the way that was resolved. The point here is when a nuclear-armed country sees an existential threat to its existence, which in this case, 12 minutes, 9 minutes to naval bases and so forth, back in those days, 60 years ago, what nuclear arms countries do is they say, look, we will not tolerate that. And they force, in Kennedy's case, Khrushchev to back down. Okay, now what happened? Well, I just mentioned that on the 21st of December, Putin had complained about the emplacement of ballistic missiles in range of Moscow, and that they could be there in 5 minutes if they were hypersonic, and that the US would inevitably get hypersonic missiles. So, new hope? Yes. On the 30th of December, at Putin's initiative, Biden and he talked by phone. And the readout of this conversation said, Biden said to Putin, quote, Washington has no intention of deploying offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, end quote. Whew. Now, Yuri Ushakov, chief advisor to Putin, rejoiced. He said, wow, they're taking us seriously. They're understanding our concerns. As a matter of fact, he says, so this is one of the chief goals. Well, actually, in the draft treaty that they had given to the United States and to NATO, that concession embodied 5 of the 8 articles in those treaties. So it was a big deal. There was great rejoicing in Moscow on New Year's Eve. Next slide, please. So that was February 12th when Putin and Biden discussed this, and the readout indicated that, once again, Biden made that undertaking. Whoops, hopes dashed. February 12th. So January, you have December 30th to February 12th. If my math is right, that's 2 weeks, right? Next conversation between Biden and Putin. The readout, Ushakov announces, sorry, folks, this is the follow-up call to what we discussed on December 30th. Quote, Biden did not really address the central key elements of Russia's initiatives, either with respect to non-expansion of NATO or non-deployment of strike weapon systems on Ukrainian territory. To these items, we have received no meaningful response. Now, just a little historical context here. This was not a secret that NATO expansion would be a big, big problem. And George Kennan, my idol as a Soviet Russian specialist, ambassador to Moscow, author of the containment process, when he heard that Bill Clinton was expanding NATO, despite the promise made to Gorbachev and Shevardnadze in February of 1990, not to expand NATO 1 inch to the east of East Germany. Despite that, Clinton was going to do that. And what George Kennan said, I'll just read the first sentence here. No, I'll read them both. Expanding NATO would be the most fateful era of American policy in the entire post-Cold War era. This is from an op-ed in the New York Times. You could see Kennan's frustration. Now, he was a cold warrior to the bone. He was responsible for a lot of things that the CIA did after the war, for God's sake. He fancied this kind of covert activity, overthrowing governments and so forth. And yet he saw what this kind of move would mean. He's so frustrated that he adds in this op-ed, Biden did not really address, why, with all the hopeful possibilities engendered by the end of the Cold War, why should East-West relations become centered on the question of who would be allied with whom, and by implication against whom, in some fanciful, totally unforeseeable, and most improbable future military conflict? Well, 1997, it was sort of unforeseeable, but the natural result of Kennan's admonition that this would be the most fateful era American policy since World War II, that has been borne out by what has happened here. Now, Professor John Mearsheimer is he's cast as the dean of the realist school of international relations. Now, my career was spent in looking after facts and advising the President of the United States what the Russians were doing, why I thought they were doing it. Just facts, man, just the facts, okay? I didn't realize that I was part of the realist school of international relations. I mean, maybe that came later, but that's what I did. Day to day, current intelligence. So I just want to remind people that Mearsheimer is not allowed to talk to any university in the United States. He's not allowed on any of the cable or other TV outlets, okay? Why? Because he had it right 8 years ago, September 2014. He got into the most prestigious journal, Foreign Affairs, quote, why the Ukraine crisis is the West's fault, the liberal delusions that provoked Putin. Now, let me just read this next one. The US and NATO now face a choice on Ukraine. They can continue their current policy, which will exacerbate hostilities with Russia and devastate Ukraine in the process. I repeat, and devastate Ukraine in the process, or they can switch gears and work to create a prosperous but neutral Ukraine. September 2014. Now, when I asked John Mearsheimer what he thought about whether Putin had any options, I asked this at a public forum, and what he said is, I think that Putin, with great reluctance, invaded Ukraine. I do not think he had any other options. He was deeply committed to the Minsk agreement because he wanted to shut down the conflict in Donbass so he would not have to invade. So I think the facts, call me a realist, call me part of the realist school of international relations, whatever that is, but that's what I think really happened. And it's a sub point to the major conclusion that this attack was provoked, whether it was whether he had any other options. Of course, honorable men can disagree, but my conclusion is that when push comes to shove, he had done everything he could. I agree with Mearsheimer saying that he tried to shut it down through the Minsk process and found out that it was being diddled. He's being deceived. And so he decided he had to limit this special military operation. Whether it was provoked or not, of course it was provoked. Whether it was illegal or not, that's an interesting question, and it's an open question. Now, I cite people like Richard Falk, the professor emeritus at Princeton who wrote the books that my fellow law school graduates read on international relations. And he says, now, Ray, look, there's a very tenable argument that Article 51 could be invoked in such circumstances. It's unsettled law. There are other views, of course, but I would submit that not only was the special military operation, if you wish, provoked, and I think I can prove it, but it may have been legal, okay? And just to accept the notion that it was unprovoked and illegal, well, that's a function of the media. And I'll close with this. I don't know about Ireland, but I suspect that most Irish citizens who follow the major media don't have an accurate rendering of what happened. And, I saw something just a day or two ago from a German parliamentarian, one of the few who has the guts to speak out. And what she said was, she talked about our duty. Es ist unsere Pflicht, nicht dumm zu machen und nicht dumm machen zu lassen. Okay, it means it's our first duty not to let ourselves be made dumb. Okay, dumb. It means the same in English as it means in German. And again, just one little quote here. What did Obama say about this? Well, he was asked to give offensive arms to Ukraine. He said, look, don't do stupid. And it was the words beginning with S. I'll just say, don't do stupid stuff, okay? He said, look, Ukraine is a core interest for Moscow in a way that it is not for the United States. And then he said this: sending arms to Ukraine would encourage the Ukrainians to think they could actually defeat the far more powerful Russians, period, end quote. So I would say that Obama seems to have been from the realist school of international relations, if you will. That's what he said. That was 2016. Biden was his vice president at that time. I just don't know why Biden didn't get it.